Today's video is brought to you by Athletic Greens AG1. More on that in a moment. Let's say I want to get from Athens, Georgia to Tampa, Florida for a conference next month. What do? Do I drive the 7-hour drive or do I make a 1.5-hour flight from Atlanta? While it might seem obvious what the answer is, it's not so obvious even now, and Tesla is about to disrupt things in a major way, and soon short-haul airline flights could be a thing of the past. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I got inspired to do this episode because of ARK Invest's Big Ideas 2023, and specifically this page 112 of the document. If you're interested, I'll leave the link to the original source because it's a huge thing. Definitely worth the read. I will probably do some other videos on this, at some point in the future. But today I wanted to focus on this, and then I wanted to talk about why this is going to be such a big deal and how it might actually affect you and also airlines and a lot of other industries. So let's just start with the page here. It says autonomous taxis could eliminate 60% of short-haul airline flights. With prices ranging from $4 to 25 cents per mile, that's a high to a low, robo-taxis could be a more attractive option than approximately 60% of short-haul airline flights based on time and cost savings, including transport to and from airports. Short-haul flights at risk currently generate about $100 billion, wow, or 20% of all airline revenues globally. Priced at 50 cents per mile, a robo-taxi would be less expensive than more than half of short-haul airline flights. At 25 cents per mile, robotaxi services could be more cost-effective than 95% of short-haul journeys. Geez. The cost and time advantages should be more dramatic for group travel. An autonomous taxi for 2 to 3 people could be a better option than 75 to 84% of short-haul airline flights. And then, of course, over here on the right, we have a chart, a graph to show us these things. So you can see for 15% of flights, robotaxis are a no-brainer. There's a substantial cost savings. That's the purple dots in the graph here. So as you can see, they save on time and in cost. And so that's why they're saying it's a no-brainer. So that's only 15%. So that's not that much. For 45% of flights, robo-taxis could be a good alternative. They cost more in time. You can see that's the green dots up here. While they do take more time, they cost a lot less than flying. So that still makes it a pretty good deal. And a lot of people will opt for that. So that's about 60%. And then for 40% of flights, robo-taxis are really not competitive because the cost and the amount of time it takes for you to get someplace versus taking an airplane is just not valid. But anyway, 60% of flights is a pretty big deal. And if you take 60% of the $100 billion, you're looking at $60 billion worth of revenue potentially being lost by airlines. That is a pretty large amount. That's something they really need to be taking account of. And before we continue on, let's take a quick break and talk about today's sponsor, AG1 by Athletic Greens. As I've mentioned many times on my channel, I try to take care of my body as well as my mind, and Athletic Greens AG1 is one of the superpowers that I have. This is an amazing superfood with 75 minerals, vitamins, prebiotics, and probiotics in it. It's vegan, gluten-free, non-GMO, no pesticides, no added sugar, and it actually tastes delicious. It actually has a hint of pineapple in it because there is pineapple in it, as well as papaya, and a bunch of other really amazing ingredients. This thing is I can't even tell you how much of a difference this has made in my life. So it supports your health, your immune system, your gut, and just your general feeling of well-being in life. And if you use my special link in the description, just click on it, you get free a year's supply of vitamin D3 and K2, and also 5 travel packets, so you never have to be without your AG1, even if you're traveling. I do what I call light intermittent fasting, which means that I don't eat between 9 p.m. in the evening and 10 a.m. in the morning. And this is the first thing that I eat in the morning, either like this if I don't work out, or on days when I work out before I eat, I actually put this in a smoothie. And if you want to see my recipe for the smoothie, well, here it is. I add 1 banana for smoothness and creaminess. Berries, apples, fresh fruit, whatever is in season works really well. Some of that in there. A couple of heaping tablespoons of plain Greek yogurt, some water so it blends well, and a scoop of Athletic Greens AG1. Blend it up for 30 or 40 seconds. Drink this before anything else in the day, and trust me, you will feel like $1,000,000. So again, thank you so much to AG1 for sponsoring this video. I absolutely love this product. And don't forget, if you click on the link in the description, you get a year's supply of vitamin D3 and K2, and also 5 travel packets, so you're never without Athletic Greens AG1. And now let's get back to it. All right, so getting back to my introduction, let's take a particular use case in this case, right? So this is me going from Athens, Georgia to Tampa, Florida. I'm looking at doing this, the beginning of March, whatever, it doesn't really matter. So I just picked a date because of course I have to have a date for airplane flights. So you can see here that Athens to Tampa is about, let's just call it 500 miles, 472 miles, or about 800 kilometers, or 7 hours and 15 minutes. And if you want to be generous, if you're charging an EV, you could add an extra hour to that. So maybe 8 hours and 15 minutes if you're driving an EV. You also will have to stop in a gas car as well, so you could add 15 or 20 minutes. So call it 7.5 to 8 hours and 15 minutes or so, someplace in that order. And that, of course, is each direction, so you can just double that. So it's like about 1,000 miles and about 16-ish hours to drive back and forth from Athens to Tampa. So each direction, this is on the order of 8 hours, or a reasonably full day of driving and stuff. You have to get up in the morning, you have to drive in order to get there at a reasonable time, or you could leave after work and get there in midnight or something. But, it is an inconvenient amount of time. 7 to 8 hours is that's a big chunk of a day. And so that's the kind of thing where you're like, okay, is this worth it? And then of course you have to take account of the cost. So the cost of driving a gas car, so let's just start with a gas car at 30 miles per gallon, which is a reasonable, amount of fuel economy in a car like that, and say $3 per gallon of gas. It's probably more than that, but you're looking at approximately $50 each direction. So it's about $100 round trip in order to do this thing. And for rough figures, if you're driving a Tesla and stopping at superchargers along the way and you started with a full charge at the beginning of your trip, it would probably cost you somewhere around $50 to $65, depending exactly on how you did that. So it would be around half the cost of driving with a gas car to drive with an electric car. But anyway, we're looking at a range right now of somewhere between $50 and $100 of actual energy costs. You could add in a little bit of wear and tear on the vehicle as well. So maybe another $10 or something like that. So say $60 to $110 to make this trip in terms of the cost. So around 16 hours and around $60 to $110 for the cost of doing this trip. So now let's compare this to kayak.com. I said I was going to be traveling with one carry-on and one checked bag and one adult. And you can see the cheapest price I got here was a Delta direct flight for $278. So already you can see that this thing is, it's going to take me more time to get down to Tampa, but it is substantially cheaper to do it via automobile, whether or not it's a gas or an electric car, versus flying Delta. And that's the cheapest price that I could find, assuming, of course, that I actually want to carry something on, right? You can get those Spirit flights if you don't carry anything on. If you have, I guess essentially if you just come with the clothes you're wearing, you could get it for about $100, which is more or less the same cost, but that's not a realistic option if you're going for a week to a conference. So anyway, $278, but then you're like, oh, look, it's only an hour and 26 minutes one way and an hour 40 another direction. So like around the order of an hour and a half to get there. So that is a huge advantage over driving, but it's not that simple. For us, at least coming from Athens, it's somewhere between 90 and 120 minutes or an hour and a half to 2 hours to get to the airport, because the Atlanta airport is not that close to us. So you can put that on the front end. Then you have to be there 2 hours before the flight at least. So now we're talking 3.5 to 4 hours before the flight even begins. If the flight is on time, you can tack on another hour and a half. So now you're looking at 5 to 5.5 hours. And then of course you have to transport yourself from the airport to the hotel or convention center or whatever it is you're doing. So let's say another 20 minutes to do that. So all told, for me at least, we're talking about a travel time of approximately 6 hours to get from my house to the Tampa Convention Center. It's going to cost me $278 to fly. I am going to have to pay some amount of money to drive my car and also garage it for the whole time I'm gone. So if I'm gone for a week, that's an extra $140, $150 I have to pay at the parking garage. And ultimately, it only saves me around 2 to 2.5 hours versus the cost of driving. And in addition to that, I have to deal with being at an airport. I have to deal with the security. I have to deal with the uncomfortableness of being in these big crowds jostling around and, not being in charge of my own destiny, right? Once you get to the airport, you're pretty much in, it's TSA that allows you through the gate. And then you get to the gate and you have to sit and wait, and hopefully the flight will be on time. And if it's not, you whatever, you just have to suck it up and wait until they can fly you out. And then maybe you get a middle seat. And so you're stuck between people. It's just, it's not a pleasant experience. And for the effect of spending a good deal more money and only saving a couple of hours each direction on the travel, and also having to go when they tell you. I'm flying to Utah next month, actually on those exact dates as it turns out. But anyway, I'm flying to Utah, and I had to take these bizarre flights that get in at like after midnight and then leaves at like midnight and gets in at 4 o'clock in the morning and stuff. I mean, these are just, kind of horrible things that you have to do to yourself in order to travel on an airline as opposed to a car. And right now, of course, we are driving our vehicles to places. So that means when you drive, there is the negative aspect of having to drive for 7 or 8 hours or something each direction, and having to put up with the fact that you're like, oh, this is annoying, and I have to drive and I have to pay attention and concentrate on all of this stuff. So there is a downside, but I will tell you absolutely without a doubt, if I did have a conference, my wife actually has a conference on those dates in Tampa, which was the reason why we were looking at those particular flights. And she is going to be driving. She is not going to fly. And the reason why is the convenience and the cost savings and all of those kinds of things far, far outweigh the saving a couple of hours by going to the airport. And that's not even to mention if you wanted to make a trip with 4 people in a family, right? If you and your spouse and your 2 kids wanted to go on a trip, you're looking at 4 times the cost in order to make an airplane flight, whereas the cost of driving is effectively the same, maybe a little bit more food because the kids always want to eat at McDonald's or something on the way. But it's more or less the same cost. It's a fixed cost for the car, whether it's transporting 1 person or 4 or 5 people, versus an airplane where every single person is a multiplier for this. So you can already see where the scale of time and cost and things like that and convenience and just pleasantness fall towards driving as much as possible. And that's while you still have to drive the car. What ARK Invest is talking about with their Big Ideas 2023 is if and when the day comes when your car, we have the Tesla Model Y, of course, and it has full self-driving beta, the day that car is regulatorily allowed to drive, even if it's just on the highways, forget about the city aspects of it. If it says it will drive autonomously and you don't have to pay attention to the road just on the freeway part of the trip, then you're looking at, say, 6+ hours, 6.5 hours of the trip is going to be on freeways. And for those 6 hours, you don't have to concentrate on anything. You can sleep, you can have a conversation, you can catch up on your email, you can edit your YouTube videos, whatever it is that you want to do, you don't have to drive. So suddenly you're going from spending all of this time getting to the airport, waiting in the airport, being annoyed by all this stuff, spending all this money. And then when you get to the destination, you don't have a car either. So you still have to rent a car or you have to take Uber and things like that. So there's like all of these annoyances built into flying that aren't there. And the one downside, of course, is that it will cost you more time. But what do you care about that time if you're able to utilize that as if you were at home, right? As if you were able to do other things. And that, my friends, is going to be a massive disruption. That is going to be something that will change the face of travel. People will not want to do these short haul flights because they are, quite frankly, painful. It is no fun to go to the airport. It's not something that I ever look forward to. It's not a pleasant experience. And there are certainly things that TSA and the airline companies can do to make them more pleasant, but they don't really want to. But anyway, right now they just sort of treat us like cattle that pay us money as we come and go, and they don't really care at all. So as ARK is saying, I think that a lot of people, especially when they realize that they don't have to do the driving, which is painful in its own right? It costs a lot of concentration, it's exhausting, all of that kind of stuff. If people don't have to do that aspect of it and they can take their own automobile and it can drive most of the trip autonomously and they can actually collect that time and do things that they want to do instead, then the case for short haul air travel is going to look a lot worse than it even does right now. And many more people will opt towards that option. And then, of course, looking further into the future, if and when robo-taxis actually exist, so we're talking taxis that will take you from door to door without you even having to be in the front seat. Once those exist and they're like 50 cents a mile to drive or something, the cost of driving will go from somewhere around 72 cents a mile down to 50 cents a mile. That's going to make it substantially cheaper than flying. It will still, of course, take more time because cars don't travel as fast as airplanes. Big surprise there. And ARK Invest really only talks about the cost versus time benefit, but the real benefit is that you don't actually have to expend that time. Right now, when you drive someplace, you're driving, and that's really about the only thing you can do. You can listen to audiobooks or podcasts or things like that, or hopefully Dr. Know-It-All, and you can learn some stuff that way while you're driving, but there's not a lot you can do actively when you're driving. But once you don't have to drive anymore, then the time and effort are no longer the dictating factors because it doesn't matter to you anymore. You just have a mobile office now. It's like going to a coffee shop, right? You go to the coffee car and maybe you get yourself some coffee and you drink it and you take a nap and you work on your emails and you do some other things and you make some phone calls and you just kind of hang out in the car as opposed to being at a stationary place. You're in a mobile place, just acting as if it's your office. So at that point, the time constraint is really unimportant anymore, and it really comes down to cost because it's going to cost a lot less than flying, and also just the pleasantness of it all. Flying is a very unpleasant experience, and I think people try to avoid it as much as possible, even if you have enough money that you can do it all the time. And I know there are people who are rich enough to do private flights and things like that, so that's a whole different ballgame. And if you're in that category, you probably don't care that much about all of this anyway. But for us, lumpen proletariat here, the cost savings and the pleasantness aspect are going to tip the balance very heavily towards taking automobile robotaxi type transportation versus flying. And I think we're going to see that soon as we get regulatory approval for your own vehicles, right? So as soon as Tesla gets regulatory approval, and even if it's only on the highways, because again, that's the bulk of most longer road trips is on highways, even if it's only on the highways that it will do that autonomously and you don't have to pay attention, that's still most of the trip. And so we don't even have to wait for robotaxis for this to have a huge effect on airline travel, because already I would take this over, probably around 10 to 12 hours or something. That would be around the limit of where I would start to look at taking an airplane flight as opposed to driving if I didn't have to worry about actually concentrating on the driving. And then of course, one step further into the future, when robotaxis are here, then it's really, really straightforward. You just order up a robotaxi, you take it to your destination, you drop it off. And then when you have to go from place to place, if you have to go from the convention center back to your hotel and it's a couple of miles, you just order up another robotaxi and you don't have to worry about parking or any of that kind of stuff. So you can see the convenience factor here is going to be massively, massively in favor of robotaxis. The cost will be massively in favor of robotaxis. The time is still in favor of airplane flights, but you won't care anymore because you're not driving. So the time is not that critical. Again, it's just like being in a mobile office as opposed to being in a coffee shop. So if I were airlines, I would be very afraid of this. This is kind of a cash cow. This is 20% of their profits is these short haul flights. And especially in Europe, this is super, super popular. So, when this happens in Europe, this will be an even bigger effect there than in the United States, where things tend to be a little more separated. So if I were airline companies, I'd be really worried about this. And I would be trying to come up with ways of making flying more pleasant now so that your consumers are happier with the experience, because we're generally not happy with the experience. I would rather drive myself right now than do most of these kinds of flights. And when we get robotaxis and I'm not even driving anymore, it's going to be a no-brainer. I will do that for anything that's less than 10 hours of driving without a doubt. So that's my thoughts on flying versus robotaxi driving. What are yours? How long would you drive in a robotaxi before you would think about flying if it was cheaper and you didn't have to drive the robotaxi? Definitely let me know in the comments. And in the meantime, please do like this video so other people can find it, because that's how YouTube works, and consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. I'm really, really close to 50,000 subscribers, and we're going to have a little bit of a surprise that will happen when we actually hit that number. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you all so much for your support. I truly do appreciate it. You all make this possible. And of course, if you want to join the team, just check out the link in the description. And finally, thanks again to AG1 from Athletic Greens. You should definitely check it out. It's an amazing product, and they have a 90-day money-back guarantee, so it's really risk-free. Check out the link in the description and let me know what you think about it. In the meantime, I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.